Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Galactic Cruelty left to die, the last albino dragons found an unlikely savior. Tarkon had never been a hero, he was a mechanic, nothing more, a stubborn, grease-covered man scraping a life together on the rust-choked bones of Kelta 7, a graveyard world for the galaxy's unwanted machines. He fixed things no one else would touch, damaged drones, half-melted stabilizers, shattered automaton cores, and sold them back to equally broken people who couldn't afford anything better. On the day everything changed, he was scavenging the far side of the eastern dunes, where the ground rose like a rust-coiled sea wave and dropped into a crater of buried wreckage. The wind was sharp, howling through twisted steel and fractured holes. Most scavengers didn't come here anymore, too deep, too unstable, too easy to disappear forever beneath the shifting junk. But Tark wasn't most scavengers. He saw the structure halfway buried under a collapsed freighter wing, an old containment hold, the kind used by high-security cargo transports. Its thick, white alloy had resisted corrosion, and the emergency seal glowed faintly red. That meant it still had power. Tark's hands worked quickly, his plasma torch carving through the buckled hinges as the door hissed open. The scent of metal and stale oxygen hit him, then something else, something warm, alive. He stepped inside. At first, he couldn't see anything in the low light, then his eyes adjusted. Curled in the far corner of the cargo hold was a massive, pale figure. Snow-white scales shimmered like starlight, lined with jagged ridges and faint, bioluminescent threads. Its wings were tucked tight, yet even folded, they nearly scraped the walls. A long, thick tail lay curled around several smaller shapes, hatchlings no larger than wolves, each one twitching faintly in sleep or sickness. The creature opened its eyes. They were violet, deep, ancient, and sad. Tark didn't move, neither did she. Only when the hatchling stirred with a weak cry did the great beast shift, revealing her face fully to him. She bared her teeth, not in a snarl, but in warning. She was weak, but not helpless. Tark understood. He raised his hands. "I am not here to hurt you," he said gently, unsure whether she could understand him. "I just found you." She blinked once slowly, then lowered her head to nudge the smallest hatchling closer to her side. Tark looked around. The environmental systems were failing, no active life support, no food reserves, and the air filtration was seconds from collapse. Whoever had sealed them here had done so to forget. He knelt carefully, pulling out his portable core scanner. As he activated it, the readings blinked red across every spectrum: starvation, hypoxia, organ strain. "They'd been abandoned and left to die, stars," he whispered. "They really just threw you away." The mother dragon said nothing, but her eyes never left his, and in them he saw something rare: hope. Getting her out was the hard part. The containment hold was too deep in the wreckage to land his crawler, and the supports were too damaged to risk heavy lift equipment. So Tark did what he always did: he improvised. He spent 3 days rerouting an old hoverhauler's thrusters, rigging a manual lift system, and using scrap steel to construct a makeshift sled strong enough to bear her weight. He didn't sleep, barely ate, but when he returned to the cargo hold on the third night, she was still alive, still watching him. By then, he had started talking to her. "I don't even know your name," he said, crouching near the hatchling pile. One of them, a tiny runt with a crooked horn, had taken a liking to his voice. It gurgled softly when he spoke, pressing its snout against the cage mesh as he leaned in. "I'm Tark. Just a junker, a nobody, but I'm not going to leave you here, all right." The mother dragon responded with a low, deep hum, not threatening, not welcoming either, just present. He took that as a start. It wasn't until the 4th day, when the skies above Kelta 7 turned to storm, that things began to unravel. Tark had been guiding the hover sled, carefully inching it toward the loading ramp, when a scavenger convoy rolled up behind him. There were 5 of them, ex-military, lean, and hungry. They spotted the dragons immediately. "You pulling a myth beast out of the junk, one of them called. Albino, too rare a find, are you selling or stashing? Tark didn't answer. The man laughed. Ugly thing, I thought they wiped these out cycles ago, not worth much now, maybe for parts. The mother dragon stirred, her head rose, lips curling back just slightly. Tark stepped forward. They're not for sale. Move on, he said. The leader's smile vanished. Funny, mechanic, you think you own the dirt now? The wind howled louder, stirring the dust in the air. I'm not asking, Tark said. The leader raised a hand, and a bolt of plasma hissed from a shoulder cannon. It never reached Tark, a blinding flash of light surged from behind him, a beam of pale fire seared through the storm, striking the cannon mid-discharge. The weapon exploded, the scavengers screamed and dove for cover. Tark turned. The mother dragon was standing, wings flared wide, eyes glowing like stars in the dark. Her hatchlings were behind her, huddled but no longer silent. She stepped forward. The scavengers ran. By the time the dust settled, Tark was alone again, with a towering albino dragon curled protectively around him and a trail of melted footprints leading back into the storm. I guess that's a yes, he said softly. The dragon looked down at him, then bowed her head. Just a little. And Tark realized he hadn't saved her, she had chosen him. Tark's scrapyard had never been tidy, but now it was downright chaotic. The hangar bays had to be widened, the ceilings raised with reinforced scaffolding salvaged from retired mining rigs. He turned an old Star Cruiser cargo hull into a den for the hatchlings, its walls lined with insulation and fiberglow tubing to mimic the warmth of a mother's nest. It wasn't beautiful, but it was safe. The mother dragon, Lithia, he'd heard her name in a dream, or maybe it was something she'd whispered into his mind, watched his every move. She was still wary, still wound tight with instinct, but she was no longer angry. Tark could approach her now without fear of being singed or gutted. He'd earned a strange sort of trust, not through dominance or fear, but through consistency. He showed up, he fed her, he repaired the air circulators and rewired the thermal plates to better suit her cold-blooded physiology, and she allowed him to stay. The hatchlings, though, were another story. There were 4 in total, each of them misshapen in a different way. One had wings too large for its frame, dragging like wet sails behind it, another was eyeless but navigated with sonar clicks that bounced off the hangar walls, the smallest, the runt, had no claws, only soft, stunted paws that made climbing impossible. But they were clever, and they loved Tark. He found that out one morning when he overslept and woke to the sound of clanking metal and soft growls. He stumbled out of bed to find the hatchlings in his workshop, clumsily sorting tools, chewing on old wiring, and somehow managing to activate a half-assembled repair drone. It wheeled in circles, sparking wildly, while the eyeless hatchling chirped in triumph. "You're a menace," he muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Lithia sat just outside the workshop, observing the chaos with what could only be described as maternal exasperation. She glanced at him as if to say, "They're your problem now, too." That afternoon, he made them armor, scrap metal pieces shaped into lightweight plates, strapped across their backs and chests with welding tape and care. He painted flames on the sides, though they looked more like lopsided leaves. The hatchlings didn't care, they paraded around like soldiers. Tark watched them and felt something strange bloom in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years: family. That night, as the wind howled outside the hangar and lightning danced over Kelta 7's scrap-choked sky, Tark sat beside Lithia. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Her massive tail curled near his boots, and her breath came slow and steady, misting the air in soft plumes. Whatever it was, however it had started, they were no longer just survivors, they were a pack. Tark was in the middle of rebuilding a pulse turbine when the perimeter alarms howled to life. Red light spun across the hangar walls, and the hatchlings immediately scattered, their instincts sharp and fast despite their young age. Lithia rose with a snarl before the alert even finished its first cycle. "Something or someone is coming," he muttered, grabbing his gauntlet and scanning the outer field. "One contact, small, with no weapon systems detected, was moving fast, too fast for a simple scavenger. Then the signal froze and vanished. By the time Tark reached the hangar entrance, the figure was already there. She stood tall and sharp, draped in a long coat woven with black synth leather. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, the mark of a neural uplink that had seen military use. Her boots were caked in silver dust, drifter's dust, the kind found only in deep sector trade routes. She carried no weapon, not visibly, but she didn't need one. "I heard you picked up something rare," she said, her voice clipped and precise. "I wanted to see it for myself." Tark didn't answer. Behind him, Lithia growled once. The woman raised her hands. "I'm not here to fight. Name's Selk. I'm an ex-recovery agent, that's supposed to impress me, it just means I've seen dragons before," she said. Tark stepped in front of the door, blocking her view. "You've never seen dragons like these?" Selk tilted her head. "No, I haven't." For a moment, the air tensed. Lithia stood in the shadows, massive and silent, her pale form ghost-like under the lights. One hatchling crept to Tark's side, growling softly. Its gaze flicked over the hatchling. "Stars," she whispered. "They left babies. They left them all." Tark said, "Buried in a can like garbage." Selk didn't speak right away. "Then do you know what they are?" "They're dragons, they're weapons," she corrected. "Bioengineered to burn star cruisers." Lithia alone was considered a Class X threat. The council didn't exile her because of her looks, they were scared of what she might become if she turned against them. "She didn't turn," Tark said. "They gave her no reason to stay." Selk met his eyes. "And now you're playing caretaker." "I'm building a home." She studied him, then slowly reached into her coat and pulled out a small data drive with coordinates. "You're not the only one who cares. There are others, quiet ones who believe creatures like this deserve better. We call ourselves Embernet. You want help, you'll find it there." Tark took the drive. Cautious, Selk turned to go. At the door, she paused. "They're ugly," she said. Lithia growled louder, "But they're beautiful too." And then she was gone. Tark turned to Lithia. She was watching him with something like curiosity. "I'm not sure what I just agreed to," he muttered. She huffed smoke in his face, and, for the first time, Tark swore she almost laughed. Tark never expected naming dragons would be harder than rewiring a sublight engine with a torch in one hand and a hatchling chewing in the other. But here they were. The baby dragons had grown fast in just a few weeks, too fast, honestly. Whatever Lithia had been designed for, it hadn't included slow, gentle development. They learned by instinct, not experience. They moved like creatures born in battle, even when they tripped over their own too large wings. Tark couldn't just keep calling them "you" anymore. They responded to his voice, but they deserved more. The smallest one, the clawless runt with the habit of sneaking into Tark's bedroll and curling up in his chest like a warm, huffing engine, became Pox, not for disease but because Tark said he was contagiously annoying, and the name stuck. Pox didn't mind, he chirped and clicked and headbutted Tark's thigh every time he heard it. The wing-heavy one, clumsy and loud, had a booming roar and eyes that watched the skies with longing. Tark named him Car, after an old skybreaker pilot he'd once idolized. Car liked to jump off high places and glide until he smashed into something. Tark installed foam padding across the hangar walls just for him. The eyeless one became Ven, named after a silent drifter Tark had once known, someone who listened more than they spoke, who saw without seeing. Ven could track a rat through 5 layers of junk piled high and never make a sound. And the last one, the long-limbed female with the sharpest teeth and quietest growl, he called Nexa because when she stared at him, something in Tark's chest tightened like a spanner on a stuck bolt, and he didn't know if it was fear, admiration, or both. She was already a leader, even when Lithia towered above them all. The names helped, the dragons responded faster. They played together with more clarity, more unity. Tark built them a sky track outside the hangar, a looping mess of scaffolding and scrap that they could leap and fly between. Kar adored it, Nexa mastered it, Ven circled the perimeter silently, and Pox immediately tried to eat it. Tark stood on a nearby rise that evening, watching them tumble and roar beneath the stormy glow of Kelta 7's fractured sky. Lithia joined him, resting beside him in the dust, her body coiled like an enormous cat. She didn't speak, not with words, but she rumbled low in her throat, something soft and content. I gave them names, Tark said. Lithia blinked slowly. You think they'll live long enough to earn them? The rumble deepened, as if to say, yes, because now they have more than names, they have someone who will fight for them. The peace didn't last. It came with the sound of distant engines. Long before Tark saw the ships, Kelta 7 scanners didn't pick them up too well, cloaked too far above official monitoring lanes. Lithia heard them. She raised her head that morning and roared without warning, so loud it cracked 2 solar panels and sent the hatchlings into a panic. Tark dropped his breakfast wrench and sprinted to the control tower. By the time the scanners caught the signal, the ships were already descending, not traders, not scavengers. The silhouette on the screen was unmistakable, flat, angular, and cold, a vessel of the Galaria ascendancy. He cursed under his breath. He remembered Selk's words, they were scared of what she might become if she turned against them. He knew now they'd come not to reclaim her, but to finish what they started. He ran to the landing bay, grabbing his gauntlet and shouting orders. Kar, then, get the sky track cleared. Pox, get your teeth off that wire and follow me. Nexa, stay close to your mother. Lithia didn't wait, she launched into the sky, massive wings shaking the ground. The hatchlings scrambled to follow, some took to the air, others bounded over mounds of scrap. Tark barely had time to lock the hangar before the first blast hit, a warning shot. The second one wasn't a warning, it struck the outer dune ridge, sending fire and dust into the sky. The dragons shrieked in defiance. Lithia circled above, silver and white against the storm, a goddess of war resurrected. Tark opened the comms and hailed the lead ship. This is Teravan. You're in my airspace, turn around. A cold voice answered, this is not your concern. You're harboring dangerous bow weapons. Stand aside. He laughed. You had your chance, you threw them away. Now they're mine. There was no response, just a high-pitched whine, targeting locks engaging. The first drop pods came down like meteors, slamming into the ground with the precision of trained killers. Armored drones unfolded from them, black-clad, insectal, and bristling with plasma cutters. Pox lunged first, unafraid and full of fire, his breath barely singed their armor, but it gave Kar time to dive from above and crush 2 beneath his talons. Then, flanking right, silent and sudden, Kar ripped through one with his horns. Nexa didn't roar, she stalked, struck fast, and vanished before they could react. And Lithia was a storm-given form. She slammed into the largest drop ship with such force that it crumpled like paper, fire blooming around her. Her tail swept a dozen drones from the ridge, her breath scorched the air, blinding the soldiers that followed. Tark watched from the control tower, hands shaking, sweat running into his eyes. His console blinked a dozen alerts, he didn't care, he was recording everything. Let the galaxy see. Let them remember, these weren't weapons, they were a family, and no force in the stars could take them from me. Kelta 7 burned through the night, the Galari drones never stopped coming. Tark's defense grid, hastily wired and patched with salvaged energy cells, buckled after the 5th wave. The perimeter lights shorted, the shielding faltered, every corner of the scrapyard became a battlefield. But still, the dragons fought. Lithia flew like she had been forged in war, her albino wings lit by fire as she weaved through incoming blasts, no longer hiding, no longer weakened, this was her rebirth. She had once been feared for her power, cast aside because her scales didn't shine the right way, her face too sharp, her form too alien. But now that same form struck fear into the eyes of trained soldiers. She didn't roar for vengeance, she roared for her young. Pox stayed closest to Tark, darting around him like a living shield, biting through metal limbs with a ferocity that belied his size. Car crashed through drones from above, bruised and scraped, wings flapping erratically, but he always got back up. Then crept through shadows, stalking and striking with eerie precision, his blind gaze somehow always knowing. Nexa, quiet and graceful, moved through the wreckage with deadly elegance, striking only when needed and protecting her siblings without hesitation. Tark worked with his blistered, bleeding hands. He dragged wounded drones into the hangar and stripped them for power cores. He wired their batteries into the shield grid, pushing it back to life with short bursts of emergency strength. Every time it flared back on, he bought them another minute, another breath. At one point, he collapsed near the generator, coughing from smoke and exhaustion, and felt a soft head press against his shoulder. Then the dragon didn't speak, but her body was warm and grounding. Tark touched her scaled forehead. "Not giving up," he muttered. "Not today." The comms crackled with a new voice. "This is Captain Zev of the Galari Strike Fleet. You've made your point, human. Surrender, the dragons. We won't ask again." Tark dragged himself to the transmitter and slammed the button. "They're not yours to take. You left them to die, I found them, and I'll die before I hand them back." Zev responded with silence, then, "So be it." A cruiser entered low orbit, its cannons charged. Tark looked up through the cracked roof of the hangar, the sky glowed red with fury, and Lithia rose. She ascended with a speed that made the sky itself seem slow, her wings cut through the clouds, trailing molten air. The cruiser locked onto her with precision beams, too many, too fast, even she couldn't survive that alone. But she wasn't alone. Nexa shot up after her, small but swift, Car followed, unsteady but determined, and even Pox, the smallest of them all, with patched wings and uneven breath, took to the sky. They rose together, a family. The cannons fired, and the sky cracked open. The blast should have ended them, but Lithia didn't stop. She cut through the barrage with fire that tore the sky apart, her hatchlings weaving behind her. The cruiser's shields flared and faltered. It had been built to face starships, not living storms. Tark, half delirious at the command console, watched as their formation shifted midair. Car dove first, slamming into the portside cannon. Nexa slipped beneath the hull and severed its underbelly. Pox landed directly on the sensor array and bit through it as if it were wet paper. Then Lithia struck, not with fire, but with a sound, a cry, no, a song that pierced the clouds, a resonance so deep it shook the very bones of the planet. It wasn't rage, it was grief, pain, triumph. It was everything she had been denied. Every wound carved by exile and silence was flung back into the universe like a blade. The cruiser failed its systems, its engine sputtered and died in a cascade of sparks. It began to fall. Tark barely had time to react. He triggered the hangar's emergency override, opened the lower shield doors, and ran out into the scrapyard as the sky filled with debris. The cruiser broke apart before it hit, falling in pieces, scattering into fire and steel. Lithia and her children landed in the rising dust, burned, bruised, alive. Tark reached them, coughing and bleeding but whole. He dropped to his knees beside them, tears burning his cheeks as he checked every limb, every wing. They had done the impossible, they had survived. The hatchlings huddled around Lithia. She was breathing heavily, wings limp, but she raised her head when Tark approached. Her violet eyes met his, no longer afraid, no longer alone. "I don't know what you are," Tark whispered, "but you're not monsters." Lithia rumbled low, pressing her snout into his chest. Behind them, the last flames of the battle faded, the cruiser's wreckage littered the horizon, and in its wake, the sky began to clear. They had won nothing except everything, and somewhere beyond the stars the galaxy would hear the story of the dragons they had thrown away and the human who loved them anyway. The battle left Kelta 7 scarred. Fires smoldered in the wreckage of the cruiser, and black smoke streaked the crimson sky like claw marks. Tark and the dragons had survived, but survival was no longer enough. The Galari would return next time, not with a strike team but with fleets, bureaucracy, and the full weight of law. The world now knew the albino dragons still lived, and they would come to erase them. Tark sat at the edge of the hangar that night, a thick blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the stars above cold and distant. Lithia lay beside him, her breath steady but strained. She was healing, albeit slower than before. Her energy had been drained by the cry she'd unleashed during the battle, a song Tark could still hear if he closed his eyes. The hatchlings were curled together inside the hangar, silent for once, exhausted from war. Even Carr was asleep, a rare and comforting thing. Tark held the data drive Selk had left him. He hadn't used it before, he hadn't trusted it. But now he had no choice. He slid it into the comms console. The screen flickered, static danced, then it resolved into a simple interface, a single button glowing with golden light, send beacon. He pressed it, and a signal pulsed from the station, shot out into the black, encrypted in a dead language, bouncing across the old networks like a whisper in a cathedral. Tark didn't know if it would reach anyone, but if Selk had been right, Embernet would hear it, and if Ember still lived, maybe, just maybe, they'd come. The days that followed were filled with urgency. Tark rebuilt the shielding system with salvaged armor plates from the cruiser wreckage. He constructed hidden launch ramps, reinforced the dragon dens, and programmed aerial beacons to scatter false signals if more ships arrived. Lithia regained her strength slowly, but there was something in her now, something ancient and calm, as if she had passed through a storm and come out the other side, different, wiser. She no longer patrolled at night, she simply watched, as if she could see further now, beyond the present, into what was coming. On the 6th day after the battle, the first ship answered the beacon. It didn't come in weapons hot, it drifted into orbit like a ghost, painted silver and blue, its hull scrolled in dozens of dialects. It bore no flag, no allegiance, just a symbol, a single flame. Tark stepped onto the landing field as the ramp descended. Selk emerged, flanked by others, pilots, engineers, defenders, wanderers, people from fractured worlds, each one marked by exile, by grief, by survival. She looked at the hatchlings playing in the dust, then at Lithia and finally at Tark. "You called," she said. "I wasn't sure anyone would answer." Tark replied softly, giving himself a tired smile, "They always do eventually, when the fires are real." Behind her, more ships dropped through the clouds. Embernet had come. The transformation of Kelta 7 began at sunrise. The Embernet fleet brought not just weapons and shields, but people, biologists, builders, translators, teachers, refugees who had nowhere left to go. They came with quiet reverence, knowing they had not come to lead but to help. Tark's scrapyard became the heart of something new, not a base, not a fortress, but a sanctuary. Lithia took her place at its center, her wings draped around the dens where her children played and learned. The hatchlings no longer hid, they soared. Carr's wings finally steadied in flight, then learned to guide the smaller creatures brought in from broken moons. Nexa stood guard at the gates, while Pox, with his crooked tail and loud voice, became an unofficial ambassador to every child who wandered into the sanctuary and needed something brave and kind to lean on. And Tark became something between a father, a builder, and a stubborn old myth. He taught mechanics to anyone who wanted to learn, how to turn scrap into tools, and pain into purpose. When he spoke, the dragons listened, when he rested, they watched over him. He added a new wing to the hangar, a hall of memories inside of it, and welded together fragments of the first wreckage where he found Lithia, at the center a single word engraved in 10 different languages. Though the Galactic Council issued sanctions, Tark ignored them. The Galari sent another envoy, Embernet met them in orbit, and they left with fewer threats and more silence. The sanctuary thrived, and in the quiet moments when the wind swept through the junk fields and the stars glittered just a little closer, Tark would sit with Lithia beneath the open sky. Sometimes he'd talk, sometimes not, she never minded, she understood, as few ever did, that you don't have to be beautiful to be worthy, and you don't have to be perfect to be loved. Real family is forged not in blood but in the fire of being chosen and choosing in return. Beneath the new sky, the dragons flew.